Some cars make history, others make you scratch your head. These 12 bizarre American creations were built with wild ideas, strange designs, and choices that left everyone wondering, what were they thinking? From futuristic flops to outrageous failures, these cars didn't just bend the rules, they broke them completely. And somehow, they actually made it to the road. The 1970 AMC Rebel Machine wasn't just a muscle car, it was a punch in the face to automotive complacency, a firecracker of patriotism and power that defied every expectation people had about the American Motors Corporation. In a decade defined by increasingly bold horsepower wars, AMC was the oddball sitting at the edge of the cafeteria. Quiet, practical, doing its homework while the cool kids with GTOs and SS396 Chevelles were doing burnouts in the parking lot. But then, almost overnight, the quiet kid slammed his textbook shut, stood up and walked into the street with a red, white, and blue battle flag painted across his jacket, and under the hood was something that growled. The Rebel Machine was AMC's answer to every scoffing enthusiast who said the company couldn't build a real muscle car. It started life as a humble, mid-sized Rebel sedan, reliable, affordable, and utterly forgettable. Then AMC's performance division, eager to shake off their reputation for thrift store cars and join the V8 arms race, took that base model and turned it into a rolling declaration of independence. The first thing they did was stuff it with AMC's most ferocious engine, a 390 cubic inch V8, factory underrated at 340 horsepower and 430 lb-ft of torque. But anyone who spent 5 minutes behind the wheel knew it had more in the tank. This was a high-compression, big-bore brute that could rip through the quarter-mile in the high 13s when properly set up. But raw performance was only half the story. What really set the machine apart, what made it unforgettable, was how it looked. AMC didn't settle for stripes or subtlety. No, this thing came slathered in frost white with thick, patriotic racing stripes of red, white, and blue wrapping the hood, sides, and deck lid like it had driven straight off the cover of a bicentennial firecracker box. A functional ram air scoop with a hood-mounted tachometer stood front and center like a periscope on a battleship. Chrome trumpet exhaust tips jutted from the rear like cannons. It didn't just whisper performance, it screamed it from a rooftop through a bullhorn. The suspension was beefed up with heavy-duty springs and shocks, and it rode on 15-inch Magnum 500 wheels wrapped in Goodyear polyglass rubber. Front disc brakes came standard. Inside, it was all business. Bucket seats, a Hurst 4-speed shifter, and enough torque to twist the drive shaft into a pretzel if you dropped the clutch too hard. It wasn't plush, it wasn't refined, but it could blow the doors off a lot of better-known muscle cars at a stoplight. But here's the twist. Most people didn't get it. AMC was known for economy cars and rugged off-roaders, not muscle. The machine's outlandish appearance turned off conservative buyers, and its blue-collar badge kept performance purists away. Even though it offered big block performance for small block money and could embarrass GTOs and 442s, it sat unloved on many dealership lots. Just 2,126 machines were sold in 1970, and then the project was quietly shelved. No second act, no sequel. And yet, those who bought one knew they had something special. One owner recalled, "People laughed at it until I lit up the tires and left them staring at smoke and stripes. It was the ultimate sleeper dressed in circus paint, a car that looked like a gimmick, but moved like a predator." Today, the AMC Rebel Machine is a unicorn, a misunderstood, underappreciated flash of brilliance from a company that dared to be different. It's remembered not just as a muscle car, but as a symbol of defiance. AMC didn't have the money, the ad campaigns, or the racing heritage of the Big Three, but for one glorious moment in 1970, they built a car that made the competition nervous and left tire tracks across the face of conformity. The machine wasn't built for everyone. It wasn't meant to be. It was built for the rebels, the misfits, the guys who looked at a GTO and said, "Too obvious." It was built for people who didn't care if you laughed, because they knew you'd stop laughing as soon as they hit second gear. The 1971 Ford Mustang Mach 1 429 Super Cobra Jet was the ultimate embodiment of late-stage muscle car madness. A mechanical swan song roared out in a time when the golden age of American horsepower was wheezing under the weight of insurance crackdowns, government regulations, and shifting public sentiment. It was big, bold, brash, and beautiful in a brutal kind of way. If the original 1964 1.5 Mustang was the charming rebel who brought the pony car genre into existence, the 71 Mach 1 SCJ was his unhinged older brother, a heavyweight brawler in a muscle shirt, built for war at the drag strip, not for subtlety or social grace. By 1971, Ford had completely redesigned the Mustang, giving it a wider, longer, and lower profile. Some said it looked like a Torino in a muscle suit. Others compared it to a land yacht with scoops. But there was no question, it had presence. The styling was sharp, aggressive, and mean, with chiseled lines, a prominent shark-like front end, and a roof line that looked like it had been sculpted in a wind tunnel by angry gods. But the real reason for the size increase was more practical than poetic. Ford needed room. Room to fit their largest and most unholy engine yet into the engine bay. Enter the 429 Super Cobra Jet. The SCJ was not your average big block. It was a drag racer's fever dream, disguised as a factory option. With a 4-bolt main block, solid lifters, a high-rise aluminum intake, and a Holley 780 CFM 4-barrel, the 429 SCJ was designed to survive full-throttle punishment on the quarter mile and laugh about it. Ford rated it at 375 horsepower, but like many muscle cars of the era, the real number was significantly higher, more like 425 plus by many estimates. And with the optional drag pack, it came with an oil cooler and your choice of brutal rear-end gears, 3.91 or 4.11. This wasn't a car you drove lightly. You didn't ease into a Mach 1 SCJ, you held on. Performance was, in a word, unhinged. The car could do 0-60 in around 5.5 seconds, with the quarter mile slipping by in the low 13s, if you could get traction. It was a torque monster, delivering enough twist to light up the rear tires well past second gear. You didn't need to rev it to feel the fury. Just a jab of the throttle and the car would leap forward like it had been shot out of a cannon. And yet, despite its straight-line dominance, the 71 Mustang was not exactly known for nimble handling. The added weight, nearly 3,800 pounds in SCJ form, and softer suspension meant corners were more of a suggestion than a challenge. But let's be honest, nobody bought this beast to take on winding back roads. They bought it to win red light battles and turn every trip into a statement. Inside, the Mach 1 had a space-age fighter cockpit vibe. Deep round gauges, optional wood grain panels, high-back bucket seats, and thick-rimmed steering wheels gave it a sense of purpose. The Mach 1 specific details, like the color-keyed sport mirrors, black hood treatment, dual racing stripes, and the famous shaker hood scoop that quivered with every rev, elevated it into something more than just another Mustang. It was a symbol of defiance, of indulgence, of one last ride before the lights went out, and go out they did. Even as the SCJ roared down boulevards and shredded drag strips, the walls were closing in. Insurance premiums on high horsepower cars were skyrocketing. The EPA was cracking down. Gas prices were creeping upward, and public sentiment was cooling fast on gas-guzzling speed demons. Sales of the 429 SCJ were predictably low. Only a small fraction of Mach 1 buyers checked that box. By 1972, the SCJ was gone. By 1973, the Mustang was even heavier and softer. The muscle era was over. Today, the 1971 Mustang Mach 1 429 SCJ is a cult legend, revered by collectors and feared by traffic cops. Survivors are rare, and real SCJ cars with factory drag pack are highly prized. They are reminders of a time when horsepower was king, logic was optional, and Ford was willing to drop an artillery shell under the hood of its beloved pony car just because it could. One owner put it best. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement. It said, "I don't care what gas costs. I don't care what the neighbors think. I want to go fast, and I want to look like a maniac doing it." Every time I started it up, I felt like the world might end, and I smiled. The 1970 Plymouth Superbird is a car that wears its eccentricity with pride. Born from the sharp edge of NASCAR's homologation rules, it wasn't just a car, it was a statement. It was the automobile equivalent of a dare, a what-if that somehow managed to transcend the ridiculousness of its design to become one of the most iconic muscle cars of all time. With its towering rear wing, elongated nose cone, and vibrant color palette, the Superbird was an absolute attention magnet on the street. But it wasn't designed for the street, it was designed for the track. Plymouth's engineers, knowing that the best way to compete against the dominant Ford and the rising popularity of the Dodge Charger Daytona, came up with a bold plan. Create something that was too fast, too aerodynamic, and too absurd for anyone to ignore. To do this, they borrowed from the cutting-edge principles of aerodynamics and partnered them with brute force engineering. The result? The Superbird, a car that combined the absurdity of a cartoon with the precision of a finely tuned racing machine. One of the standout features of the Superbird was, of course, its massive rear spoiler. Rising up over the trunk lid like a 1960s science fiction spaceship, it wasn't just there for looks. The wing, along with the pointed nose cone, was designed to reduce drag and increase downforce. While it may have looked like something Wile E. Coyote might use to catch the Roadrunner, in truth, this aerodynamic innovation was the key to its performance on the track. The large wing helped the car stay planted at high speeds, increasing stability and providing the grip necessary for the track. It wasn't a gimmick, it was engineering that had a clear, focused purpose. The Superbird was born to race, but it wasn't an easy sell. Its striking design made it polarizing to the public, and dealerships struggled to move the cars. At nearly $4,000, the Superbird was a premium vehicle, and the market wasn't quite ready for a car that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie. But despite its lack of mainstream appeal, it performed like a champion. Under the hood, the Superbird came equipped with one of three engine options: the 440 cubic inch Super Commando, the 446 barrel, and the mighty 426 Hemi. The Hemi, with its 425 horsepower and intimidating growl, was the crown jewel, the engine that turned the Superbird into a full-fledged road rocket. What many people didn't realize at the time was that the Superbird wasn't just fast, it was deceptively so. It was a car that looked like it could barely make it around a corner, let alone stand toe-to-toe with muscle cars like the GTO or the Chevelle. But when the rubber hit the road, the Superbird didn't just perform, it dominated. It could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles in under 6 seconds and complete the quarter mile in just over 13 seconds. Considering its massive size and its wacky aerodynamic features, these performance figures were mind-blowing for a car of its size. The Superbird's handling on the track was equally impressive, as the car proved to be more than capable of holding its own against competitors. But perhaps what makes the Superbird most fascinating is how it bridges the gap between muscle car and automotive art. Its wild design, with colors ranging from the iconic plum-crazy purple to the striking banana yellow, was never about subtlety. The Superbird was designed to make an entrance, to demand attention. It was flamboyant in a way that only the late 60s and early 70s could embrace. Yet underneath the loud paint and the outlandish wing, there was a real race car. This was a car built for NASCAR, meant to go head-to-head with other big names, designed with precision to create a vehicle that could survive the brutality of stock car racing at speeds near 200 miles per hour. However, by the time the Superbird hit the streets, the market had already shifted. The muscle car craze was winding down, and concerns about insurance rates and government regulations on emissions were on the rise. The Superbird, like its sister car, the Dodge Charger Daytona, was a symbol of a dying breed. By the end of the 1970 model year, the Superbird had been discontinued, leaving behind only a handful of surviving examples. Today, the Plymouth Superbird stands as one of the most valuable and iconic muscle cars ever produced. Its rarity, its raw performance, and its outlandish styling make it a sought-after collector's item, fetching six-figure prices at auctions. The very things that made it a flop in the 1970s, its absurd wing, its cartoonish nose, its outlandish colors, are now the things that define its character and its appeal. It's a car that, over time, has gone from being misunderstood to being revered, as its performance and historical significance have been fully recognized. For those lucky enough to own one, the Superbird represents more than just a fast car. It represents an era, a moment in time when the rules of design, performance, the 1971 Pontiac GT-37, often overlooked and buried under the weight of muscle car history, was a true anomaly. It's a car that managed to slip under the radar of both the casual consumer and the hardcore enthusiast, despite packing the performance chops of some of Pontiac's most legendary machines. Born out of a time when muscle cars were rapidly losing their shine due to rising insurance rates, stricter emissions regulations, and changing buyer tastes, the GT-37 was the company's last-ditch attempt to deliver performance on a budget while flying under the radar of a world that was slowly losing interest in anything that wasn't socially responsible or fuel-efficient. In many ways, the GT-37 was an afterthought, a product of Pontiac's ability to think outside the box, while simultaneously lacking the enthusiasm to let it soar. It was essentially a GTO in disguise, though few understood that. This wasn't a high-profile, in-your-face muscle car like the GTO or the Firebird Trans Am. Instead, the GT-37 was a sleeper in the truest sense of the word. It blended seamlessly into the background, a fast car hiding in plain sight. There were no extravagant badges, no flashily painted decals screaming performance, and no elaborate marketing campaigns to ensure that it reached the top of the sales charts. Yet, when the rubber met the road, the GT-37 could hold its own against anything on the street. Let's break down the essence of what the GT-37 was: a deceptively simple machine with a hidden heart of power. Built on the Le Mans platform, the GT-37 was essentially a Le Mans coupe with a performance twist. But the name? It didn't exactly roll off the tongue. Pontiac's marketing team gave the car a name that was tied to an option code rather than any sense of mystique. If you weren't in the know, you'd never realize the potential this car carried under its skin. It came with the same basic features as the Le Mans, but added muscle car essentials: a functional hood scoop, Rally 2 wheels, dual exhausts, and a few cosmetic touches that hinted at the performance lurking beneath. For those willing to dig deeper, the GT-37 offered two engine choices that turned heads in the right circles. While the base model came with a 350 cubic inch V8, the true heart of the GT-37 was found in the 400 cubic inch or 455 cubic inch high-output V8 options. With the 455 HO, it could crank out an underrated 335 horsepower, propelling the car from 0 to 60 in the blink of an eye. The power was there, plenty of it, but the recognition was not. The 455 engine had all the raw muscle that made Pontiac's big block engines legendary, yet the GT-37 flew under the radar, much like an undiscovered gem buried in a pile of overlooked junk. Inside the car, Pontiac kept things straightforward, reflecting the utilitarian nature of the GT-37's identity. It had bucket seats, a 4-speed manual transmission, and a minimalistic interior that kept the focus on performance rather than luxury. No frills, no extra bells and whistles, just the essentials. The dashboard was clean and simple, with a tachometer and a speedometer that offered no nonsense, just pure driving data. The interior felt raw, connected to the road in a way that only a true muscle car could, but without the pretension of the more famous GTO or Firebird. It was a performance-oriented interior for someone who understood that racing wasn't about opulence. It was about raw speed and the thrill of the drive. Yet for all its potential, the GT-37 struggled in the market. Pontiac's decision to leave it largely unpublicized and unpromoted meant that most buyers passed over it in favor of better-known models or more ostentatious muscle cars. By 1971, the muscle car market was already on the decline, and fewer people were willing to spend big money on something that was increasingly becoming a relic of a bygone era. Even the insurance rates were killing sales, and it didn't help that the GT-37 was a part of Pontiac's attempt to blend performance with a more affordable package. In an era where GTOs and Firebirds were still coveted, but increasingly difficult to insure, the GT-37 seemed like an awkward middle ground that didn't satisfy either the hardcore muscle car lover or the mainstream buyer. The result? Less than 6,000 GT-37s were sold in 1971, and many of those were buried in showrooms, unnoticed and unloved. Pontiac had a true muscle car on their hands, but they just couldn't find the right way to present it to the public. A small number of enthusiasts caught wind of the car's performance potential, but for the most part, it went unnoticed. It was overshadowed by its flashier siblings, the GTOs and Firebirds, both of which had more established legacies. Fast forward to today, and the GT-37 has transformed from a forgotten underdog into a coveted piece of automotive history. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona wasn't just a car, it was a full-blown engineering spectacle, one of the most audacious and polarizing vehicles ever to leave Detroit's assembly lines. Conceived as an answer to the competitive pressures of NASCAR, it broke the mold of what was expected from a street car. The Daytona was designed for one thing, speed, and it carried that purpose with a level of boldness that bordered on arrogance. With a profile that screamed function over form, the Daytona became both a marvel of engineering and a symbol of the muscle car era's final push before it collided headfirst with the 1970s regulations that would transform the automotive landscape forever. In the world of NASCAR, aerodynamics had begun to play an increasingly important role. Dodge's Charger model, which had been a strong contender on the tracks, was still lacking the kind of edge that would allow it to dominate the high-speed races. That's when the decision was made to create the Charger Daytona, a car that would combine the power of the Charger with radical new features designed to improve its performance on the track and on the road. This included a host of changes that would not only make it the fastest Dodge car ever made, but also a design so outlandish that it would remain imprinted in automotive history. The most notable feature of the Daytona was its rear wing, an imposing, towering structure that almost seemed to defy the very laws of physics. Standing at an insane height of 23 inches, the wing wasn't just for looks, it was designed for function. It provided much-needed downforce at high speeds, ensuring that the car would stick to the track and remain stable at top speed, a critical factor in NASCAR racing. It's hard to imagine a time when such a bold design element wasn't immediately accepted, but in 1969, the wing was met with skepticism from all corners, even as it performed admirably on the racetrack. In fact, the Daytona set records in NASCAR, dominating on super speedways and securing numerous victories. It was a game changer for racing, yet the very thing that made it a track star also made it a questionable choice for street driving. But the Daytona's oddball appearance didn't end with the rear wing. The front of the car was a radical departure from the typical muscle car aesthetic. Dodge redesigned the nose of the Charger, stretching it out to a pointy, almost shark-like design. The extended front end not only created a more aerodynamic profile, but also gave the car a menacing presence on the road. The end result was something that looked like no other car on the market, a futuristic, purpose-built machine that had more in common with a fighter jet than a street car. Under the hood, the Charger Daytona was no slouch either. The standard engine was the 440 Magnum V8, which produced a healthy 375 horsepower. But the real star of the show was the 426 Hemi V8, a beastly engine that churned out a jaw-dropping 425 horsepower and 490 lb-ft of torque. With this engine, the Daytona could reach speeds of over 150 mph, a feat that few cars of its time could match. But raw speed wasn't the only thing the Daytona had going for it. It had handling too. With its stiffened suspension, heavy-duty rear axle, and wide tires, the Daytona was able to stick to the road with remarkable tenacity. It was a car that, despite its size and weight, could carve through turns and race down highways with ease. However, this performance came at a cost. The Daytona's design was not only unconventional, but also impractical for most everyday drivers. Its sheer size, nearly 19 feet long, made it cumbersome in tight spaces, and the aerodynamics that made it a king on the racetrack made it something of a nightmare in everyday driving. The car was heavy, with a large frontal profile that reduced visibility and made it difficult to maneuver in urban settings. Furthermore, the rear wing was more of a hindrance than a help in a typical suburban setting, constantly attracting stares and, inevitably getting caught on garage doors, trees, or anything else that came in contact with it. It was a car made for the open road and the racetrack, not for casual commuting. Despite its racing success, the Charger Daytona was never a big seller. Dodge only produced 503 units in 1969, and many of them were sold to enthusiasts who knew what they were getting, a piece of NASCAR history. The car was expensive, limited in availability, and had a look that was just too outlandish for the general public to embrace. For many people, the Daytona was a car they could only admire from afar, its massive rear wing looming like a statement of defiance against the more conventional muscle cars of the day. While other cars like the GTO and Chevelle commanded respect on the streets, the Daytona had to earn its respect the hard way, by surprising the hell out of anyone who underestimated it. The 1974 Pontiac GTO, a final iteration of the once iconic muscle car, marked the end of an era. For muscle car enthusiasts, this was a bittersweet chapter, one that witnessed the fading of a legend, once known for its raw, untamed power, now relegated to a more subdued, almost unrecognizable form. The early 1970s were a time of great change in the automotive world. Gas crises, rising insurance premiums, and increasingly stringent emissions regulations had dealt severe blows to the muscle car segment. The GTO, which had first made waves in the mid-1960s with its fearless performance and aggressive attitude, found itself struggling to maintain relevance. By 1974, what remained was a shadow of its former self, trying to cling to the vestiges of glory that had once made it the symbol of American performance cars. In many ways, the 1974 GTO represented the perfect storm of compromises. While the name GTO still carried weight, the car itself had been neutered in nearly every aspect. The car's iconic 400 and 455 cubic inch V8 engines, which had once roared with power, were no longer offered. In their place was a tame 350 cubic inch V8, producing just around 200 horsepower, a far cry from the 3T to 370 horsepower it had once been capable of delivering. For those hoping for something more potent, the optional 400 cubic inch V8 pushed the numbers to a more respectable 230 horsepower. But this was still a far cry from the brutish performance of the earlier models. Pontiac, in an attempt to adapt to the changing market, had removed much of what made the GTO so memorable. Despite the reduction in power, the GTO was still packaged as a performance vehicle, but in a much more conservative form. The handling had been tuned for comfort rather than aggression, and the car's weight had ballooned, making it a less nimble and more cumbersome ride. With fewer performance options, the GTO was no longer the high-revving, tire-shredding monster that had once set drag strips ablaze. Instead, it had become a car that attempted to balance the image of muscle with the realities of rising fuel costs and stringent safety and emission standards. The 1974 GTO was also built on the Chevrolet Nova platform, a choice that did little to inspire excitement among traditional GTO fans. The Nova was a solid, dependable car, but it lacked the unique identity and performance pedigree of the original GTO. Pontiac's decision to base the GTO on the Nova led to complaints that the car had lost its soul. The GTO had always been about more than just performance. It was about making a statement, about being the best on the road, a car that stood out among a sea of ordinary vehicles. But in 1974, the GTO's presence was almost diminished, buried under the weight of a car that wasn't designed to shock the world. In terms of styling, the 1974 GTO still carried some of the recognizable cues of its predecessors. Muscular fenders, a low profile, and a sporty front grille. But it lacked the aggressive edge that had once made the GTO a visual knockout. The body was slightly more rounded and less angular, giving the car a more conservative appearance that reflected the changes in the market. The rear end, once iconic with its twin exhaust tips and aggressive stance, now looks soft and underwhelming. Even the interior, though comfortable, lacked the sporty, high-performance vibe that had been a hallmark of the GTO in its heyday. The entire design seemed aimed at people who were looking for a personal luxury car, rather than the road warrior GTO of old. Despite all these changes, the GTO still managed to maintain a few traits that were worthy of its legendary name. The handling, although not as sharp as it had once been, was still relatively responsive. The car's ride was smooth thanks to a suspension system that prioritized comfort over sportiness. The 350 and 400 V8s, while no longer the powerhouse engines of the past, still provided sufficient thrust for spirited driving, even if they couldn't compare to the GTOs of the 1960s. For the driver willing to look beyond the softer edges of the 1974 model, there were still moments of the old GTO magic to be found. For many owners of the 1974 GTO, the car's appeal lay in its ability to surprise. While the performance might not have matched that of the classic GTO, the car still had a certain flair. As one former owner recalls, it wasn't the loud, roaring beast I remembered, but when you opened it up on a stretch of empty road, it still had a nice kick. It wasn't a fire-breathing monster anymore, but it could still catch people off guard. However, despite these moments of enjoyment, the 1974 GTO was an embodiment of a muscle car era that was rapidly coming to an end. The public's appetite for performance cars had diminished, and the introduction of government regulations around emissions and safety only added to the GTO's difficulties. The 1967 Mercury Cougar XR7 GT was one of those cars that defied easy categorization. At a time when the Mustang was firmly planted as Ford's pony car, Mercury sought to offer something more refined, a luxury-oriented performance car that still delivered the raw power muscle car enthusiasts craved. The result was the Cougar, a car that combined sophistication with a subtle, yet undeniable edge. And the XR7 GT was the embodiment of that duality. Luxury and muscle, elegance and aggression, all in one package. On the surface, the Cougar was Mercury's answer to the Mustang, but with a more mature and upscale presentation. The Cougar XR7, with its distinctive hideaway headlights and refined interior trim, aimed to appeal to a slightly older and more affluent driver than the Mustang, one who wanted performance but also appreciated style and comfort. The use of wood paneling in the cabin and the luxurious features, like leather upholstery and chrome accents, gave the car a touch of class that made it feel a little more like a European Grand Tourer than an American muscle car. But when you added the GT package, the Cougar transformed into something else entirely. The heart of the XR7 GT was its 390 cubic inch V8 engine, which churned out a respectable 320 horsepower. This was no mild-mannered luxury cruiser. It was a muscle car in a tuxedo. The V8 engine delivered plenty of low-end torque and high-speed thrills, while the sleek, refined exterior hid the true power lurking underneath. Unlike some of its more brash muscle car competitors, the Cougar XR7 GT exuded an air of understated confidence, making it the perfect car for those who wanted the muscle car experience without the loud, aggressive demeanor. Performance-wise, the Cougar XR7 GT could hold its own against many of the era's most famous muscle cars. The 390 V8 was capable of propelling the Cougar from 0 to 60 mph in around 7 seconds. Impressive for a car that was as focused on comfort as it was on speed. The handling, aided by an independent front suspension and a sturdy rear axle, was more composed than many of the raw, brute-force muscle cars of the time. Yet it still retained the ability to lay down rubber with the best of them when called upon. In terms of styling, the XR7 GT was a stunning machine. The long, flowing lines and wide stance gave it a muscular appearance, but there was an elegance to its design that set it apart from the more flamboyant and angular muscle cars of the day. The hideaway headlights were a particularly striking feature, adding to the Cougar's suave, almost mysterious aesthetic. The car's refined appearance, combined with its growling engine, created a vehicle that could both turn heads and intimidate onlookers without ever shouting about it. The interior of the XR7 GT was just as impressive. The leather seats, wood trim, and premium upholstery made it feel like a luxury car, while the wide dashboard and chrome accents served as a reminder of its performance pedigree. The attention to detail was clear, as Mercury made sure that the cabin felt as luxurious as it did powerful. It wasn't just a car that got you from point A to point B. It was a place where you could sit back and enjoy the ride, even when pushing the limits of what the car could do. Despite its impressive blend of performance and luxury, the Cougar XR7 GT never quite garnered the same level of fame as the Mustang or the Camaro. Perhaps it was because the muscle car market was so heavily dominated by the more aggressive, in-your-face muscle cars of the time. But for those who knew and appreciated the XR7 GT, it became a beloved symbol of the ultimate balance between power and sophistication. For owners of the Cougar XR7 GT, the car was an expression of personality, someone who didn't need to shout about their love for performance, but still wanted to make sure they could outrun the competition when the opportunity arose. As one passionate owner recalls, it was like James Bond doing a burnout, elegant but mean. The Cougar XR7 GT never had the loud, aggressive reputation of its counterparts, but that was part of its charm. It didn't need to scream for attention. It quietly dominated the streets with style and power, and those who knew it understood exactly what it was capable of. Sadly, the Cougar XR7 GT was a relatively short-lived proposition. By the early 1970s, the muscle car era was winding down. Rising insurance costs, increasing emissions regulations, and changing tastes led to a shift in the automotive landscape, and the Cougar's more refined, luxury-tinged muscle car formula became less appealing to the younger, performance-hungry crowd that had embraced the original muscle car movement. Mercury discontinued the XR7 GT, and the Cougar's role as a performance vehicle faded in favor of more mainstream models. Today, the 1967 Mercury Cougar XR7 GT remains a hidden gem for collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate its blend of luxury. The 1971 Chevrolet Vega Yenko Stinger is one of those oddball cars that history almost forgot. When Don Yenko, the man known for taking Chevrolet's regular muscle cars and turning them into world-beating monsters, decided to work his magic on the humble Vega, he created something that was as misunderstood as it was unique. On paper, the concept was intriguing. A tiny, compact car dressed in muscle car trimmings, ready to bring performance to a market that was leaning towards smaller, more economical cars. However, the reality was far from the powerhouse that the Yenko name typically promised. The Vega itself was a small, lightweight car introduced by Chevrolet to cater to a growing demand for economy cars. By 1971, it had proven itself as a capable, albeit underpowered, entry-level vehicle. But Don Yenko saw potential in the Vega. Recognizing that the muscle car market was shifting and that the public was becoming more interested in compact cars, Yenko decided to slap his performance magic onto the Vega, turning it into a performance car, or at least an attempt at one. The result was the Yenko Stinger package. To look at it, the Stinger had all the hallmarks of a muscle car: bright racing stripes, a distinctive spoiler, and a more aggressive stance. Visually, it certainly had attitude. It was designed to stand out and give off that unmistakable mini muscle car vibe. But under the hood, the story told a different tale. Instead of the big block engines Yenko was known for, such as the 427 V8 found in the legendary Camaro and Corvette packages, the Vega Yenko Stinger only came with a 2.0-liter four-cylinder engine, modified with some basic performance upgrades, such as a higher compression ratio and a better intake system. This engine produced a modest 140 horsepower, which, while respectable for a compact car, was far from the muscle car performance that people had come to expect from Yenko's work. The Stinger package also featured a slightly upgraded suspension, sportier wheels, and a slightly stiffer frame to give the car a more engaging driving experience. However, the Vega was still a lightweight, underpowered car that lacked the raw grunt that would make a true muscle car. The performance wasn't awful by any means. It was simply too far from what people expected from a Yenko performance vehicle. It couldn't burn rubber with the likes of the Camaro or Chevelle, and its small size made it feel more like a go-kart than a muscle car on the open road. The 1971 Chevrolet Vega Yenko Stinger was a rare sight, with only around 1,000 produced. But despite its rarity, the car never really caught on. Buyers who came expecting the same kind of high-octane power that Yenko's other cars were known for were left disappointed, and the car was quickly overshadowed by other muscle cars that were much more capable in terms of performance. To make matters worse, the Vega's reputation as a small, cheap economy car worked against it. The public had a hard time seeing the Vega as anything more than a low-budget option, and the Stinger package, no matter how much muscle-inspired flair it had, didn't change that perception. As a result, the Vega Yenko Stinger faded into obscurity. It was an interesting attempt to take a basic economy car and turn it into something special, but it was a performance experiment that didn't really deliver on the promise of mini muscle. And for those who were lucky enough to own one, it became a car that was more about the cool factor and rarity than actual performance. As one survivor owner recalls, everyone expects a monster. It's really just a Vega with cool shoes. That quote sums it up perfectly. The Stinger was never a true muscle car, and while it had the appearance and some of the attributes, it was still a Vega at heart. The fact that it was a Yenko modified vehicle, however, gave it a kind of mystique. For collectors and enthusiasts today, it's a quirky reminder of a time when the muscle car world was pushing boundaries in ways that weren't always successful, but were certainly interesting. The Vega Yenko Stinger remains a curiosity, a car that tries to be more than it is, but still manages to carve out its own unique place in automotive history. While it wasn't the game changer that Yenko's other cars were, it still holds a certain charm for those who understand its story. It's the kind of car that, even if it didn't get the love it deserved, still has a cult following among those who appreciate oddities in the muscle car world. A misunderstood classic that, even now, turns heads for all the wrong reasons. The 1976 Dodge Aspen RT is one of those cars that encapsulates the last gasps of the muscle car era, a time when the automotive world was being irrevocably changed by the pressures of environmental regulations, insurance premiums, and shifting consumer tastes. By the mid-1970s, muscle cars were in their twilight years, and the Aspen RT was the Dodge brand's attempt to keep the performance flame flickering, albeit in a rather subdued and increasingly irrelevant form. To understand the Aspen RT's place in history, we need to look back at the muscle car landscape. The muscle car golden age was undeniably the 1960s and early 1970s, a period marked by big block engines, raw horsepower, and the throaty roar of American performance. But by the mid-70s, muscle cars had become a shadow of their former selves. Fuel shortages, emissions regulations, and a shift in public perception toward more fuel-efficient, less aggressive vehicles signaled the end of the performance arms race. What remained were cars like the Aspen RT, which tried to emulate the muscle car image without the heart and soul of its predecessors. The 1976 Aspen Art was essentially a sportier version of the compact Aspen sedan, which itself was part of Chrysler's push into the more fuel-efficient compact car market. The RT package was meant to provide just a glimmer of the old muscle car magic, a style statement more than a performance car. It included body stripes, a hood scoop, sportier suspension components, and, of course, the legendary RT badge. This badge, once associated with some of the most iconic muscle cars ever built, now adorned a car that, while decent, didn't exactly set the world on fire in terms of performance. Under the hood, the Aspen RT came with a 360 cubic inch V8 engine, which, at best, produced a meager 245 horsepower. While this was a decent amount for the era, it was nowhere near the monstrous figures associated with the muscle cars of the previous decade. The big block engines that powered classics like the 1969 Dodge Charger or the Plymouth Roadrunner were now relegated to history, and what replaced them were smaller, less powerful engines that were more focused on fuel efficiency than outright power. The 360 V8 in the Aspen RT was more about compliance with emission standards than about thrilling performance. It wasn't bad, but it certainly wasn't what fans of the muscle car era were expecting. The suspension upgrades did their best to make the Aspen RT feel more sporty, but the reality was that the car was still a compact sedan, and it didn't handle or feel like a true muscle car. The power was there in brief bursts, but once you pushed past the initial acceleration, the car quickly felt heavy and out of its element. The manual transmission option was available, and while it made the car a bit more engaging to drive, the experience was still a far cry from the visceral, raw power of the muscle cars that had defined the 1960s and early 70s. Perhaps the most notable feature of the Aspen RT was its appearance. The car was decked out in flashy, eye-catching graphics that screamed muscle, even though the performance didn't back it up. The signature RT stripes were joined by a fake hood scoop, a design cue that had become a trademark of performance cars, even if it was purely cosmetic here. T-tops were also an option, adding to the car's sporty image, even though they did little to enhance the driving experience. The Aspen RT looked the part, flashy and aggressive, but underneath it was more about show than go. In a world that was rapidly losing interest in traditional muscle cars, the Aspen RT was caught in an awkward position. On one hand, it was an attempt to cater to the last vestiges of the muscle car crowd, those who still craved a sense of performance and aggression. On the other hand, it was also trying to appeal to a more conservative, fuel-conscious market that was beginning to favor compact sedans and more practical vehicles. The result was a car that didn't fully satisfy either camp. The muscle car crowd had already moved on, and the mainstream market wasn't interested in a car that was trying to revive an old image. By 1990, the muscle car era was all but dead. The introduction of the Aspen RT, a car that had muscle car looks but lacked the soul and power of its predecessors, marked the final attempt of the 1970s to keep the dream alive. The RT package was a flash in the pan and production numbers were low. It was a car that, while not a total failure, couldn't escape the realities of the automotive industry at the time. It looked like a muscle car, but it wasn't one at heart. The Aspen RT is today a curious relic of a bygone era, a car that didn't have the time to make an impact before the muscle car era faded into the past. For owners, it was a reminder of the days when muscle cars ruled the streets, but for the rest of the world, it was an oddity, out of place and out of time. The 1968 AMX, a two-seat muscle car from AMC, is one of those rare, quirky machines that confound the automotive world, leaving enthusiasts scratching their heads and wondering what might have been. Smaller than a Mustang and quicker than a Camaro SS, it was a performance car with a personality all its own. But the question that remains unanswered to this day is why did AMC build it? The AMX was, in many ways, a bold and unconventional move. In a market saturated with pony cars and muscle cars, AMC's decision to introduce a two-seat sports car seemed like a long shot, a gamble that, unfortunately, never fully paid off. While it was packed with performance, style, and the kind of driving experience that would make enthusiasts salivate, the AMX never quite found its place in the hearts of American car buyers. At its core, the AMX was a performance machine. Powered by a 390 cubic inch V8 engine, the AMX was capable of producing around 315 horsepower, a figure that, in 1968, made it a genuine contender among the best muscle cars of the era. It was a small car with a compact, aggressive stance that made it quick on its feet. It had the ability to rocket down the quarter mile, outperforming many of its larger, more established competitors. Yet despite all of its performance, the AMX struggled to carve out an identity in a market that was clearly more interested in traditional muscle cars like the Mustang and the Camaro. What made the AMX so intriguing was its two-seat layout, a bold move by AMC that set it apart from the crowd. In a world of four-door sedans and muscle cars with rear seats that few people ever used, the AMX was a throwback to the idea of a pure, no-nonsense sports car. It was a car built for driving enthusiasts who didn't want to share the experience with anyone else. It was essentially AMC's answer to the Corvette, minus the hefty price tag and the fiberglass bodywork. While the Corvette was a car for the rich and the well-established, the AMX was aimed at the everyman who wanted sports car thrills without the high cost. But this was where the AMX ran into trouble. The automotive world in the late 1960s was a competitive place, and the market was flooded with pony cars, muscle cars, and sports cars. While the AMX had impressive performance credentials, it was never able to capitalize on its unique position as a two-seater muscle car. The Mustang, Camaro, and even the Corvette had established fan bases and had cornered the market on their respective niches. The AMX, by comparison, was a bit of an oddball. Part of the issue was that buyers didn't quite know what to do with a two-seat muscle car. Unlike the Corvette, which was established as a true sports car, the AMX was caught between the worlds of pony cars and dedicated sports cars. It didn't quite have the refinement of a Corvette, and it didn't have the wide appeal of a Mustang or Camaro. It was too small and too specialized for the average American muscle car buyer, but it was also too rugged and unrefined to truly compete with established sports car brands. Despite the lack of widespread recognition, the AMX developed a loyal following among enthusiasts who appreciated its unique character. It was a car that appealed to those who didn't just want a car to drive, they wanted an experience. The AMX was a blast to drive, with its low weight and nimble handling, making it a joy on twisty roads and tracks. The 390 V8 gave it plenty of power to back up its aggressive styling, and its compact size made it easy to maneuver. In many ways, it was the perfect car for someone who wanted a true muscle car without the bulk. Yet despite its performance and unique design, the AMX's place in history was never fully solidified. AMC, a company that was already struggling to compete with the likes of Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler, simply couldn't generate enough buzz for the AMX to become a mainstream success. It was too niche for the masses and not exotic enough to rival the likes of the Corvette or the Jaguar E-Type. As a result, the AMX faded into relative obscurity, remembered by a small but dedicated group of enthusiasts who still cherish its unique qualities. Today, the 1968 AMX is seen as a rare and underappreciated gem in the muscle car world, one that was ahead of its time but perhaps too ahead of its time for its own good. It was the sports car for people who didn't want to follow the crowd, and for those who were lucky enough to drive one, it remains a thrilling, if misunderstood, piece of automotive history. In the words of one AMX driver, it was a Corvette for people who hated fiberglass or didn't have 5K. A simple line, but it perfectly encapsulates what the AMX was all about. An affordable, no-frills performance car that was built for those who appreciated the pure joy of driving without all the baggage that came with other sports cars of the era. The 1977 Pontiac Can-Am was not just another car, it was a fleeting, high-octane moment in automotive history that embodied the very essence of the muscle car era at its twilight. A car that seemed out of place in its time, the Can-Am arrived on the scene as a last desperate attempt by Pontiac to keep the muscle car flame alive in an age of rising emission standards, fuel crises, and changing tastes. Designed using the base Grand Am platform, the Can-Am was Pontiac's boldest statement in a time when few were willing to take risks in the muscle car market. Muscle cars, the legends of the 1960s and early 70s, were in their death throes, casualties of tightening government regulations and the increasing importance of fuel efficiency. Yet, Pontiac saw the opportunity to give one last burst of American performance, a final hurrah for the aging breed of cars that once ruled the streets. Beneath the flashy exterior, the Can-Am was equipped with a 400 cubic inch V8 engine, a power plant that churned out just over 200 horsepower. It wasn't as potent as the legendary engines of the previous decade, but it was still capable of delivering a throaty, raw power that was perfect for those nostalgic for the muscle car era. The engine was mated to a 4-speed manual transmission, giving drivers that all-important connection to the road, and making it one of the last muscle cars to offer that level of engagement before the automatic transmission took over. The Can-Am's design was a tribute to everything that made muscle cars great. The car came equipped with a shaker hood scoop, which protruded from the center of the hood, signaling that this was a machine meant for serious performance, not just flashy looks. A rear spoiler completed the aggressive stance, and the car was dressed in bright, attention-grabbing graphics that screamed muscle even before the engine roared to life. Yet, despite its bold looks, the Can-Am was still based on the relatively conservative Grand Am, a car that was known more for its comfortable ride and upscale features than for its muscle car pedigree. However, there was a catch. As much as Pontiac wanted the Can-Am to be a muscle car, it was, at best, a shadow of its predecessors. The 400 V8 was far from the fire-breathing 429 and 454 big blocks that powered the muscle cars of the past. And despite its bold appearance, the car's performance wasn't quite as mind-blowing as the likes of the GTO or the Chevelle SS. The car's power was enough to hold its own against the other cars on the road, but it couldn't quite measure up to the legendary muscle machines that came before it. More importantly, Pontiac had misjudged the market. By the time the Can-Am hit the streets, the muscle car craze was already in decline. The market for high-performance cars had shrunk drastically, and the Can-Am was launched into a world where fuel economy, safety, and practicality had become more important than raw power and style. In the face of rising gas prices and stricter emissions regulations, The Can-Am was something of a relic before it even had a chance to establish itself. And with only 1,377 units produced, it became one of the rarest muscle cars of the 70s. It didn't help that Pontiac didn't fully commit to marketing the Can-Am. The car came and went with little fanfare, its status overshadowed by the more famous muscle cars of the era. Pontiac's decision to not push the car aggressively meant that few people even knew it existed. The Can-Am was one of those rare cars that didn't get the attention it deserved in its time. Many enthusiasts didn't even believe it was real. It was like a ghost in the automotive world, a strange, elusive machine that could only be seen in fleeting moments. For those who did manage to see one, the car was a spectacle, an anachronism, a reminder of the raw, unrefined power of American muscle that had once ruled the streets. Despite its relatively humble performance, the Can-Am left a lasting impression on the lucky few who got to own one. The car's uniqueness and rarity made it a desirable collector's item, even if it wasn't exactly the powerhouse that muscle car fans had come to expect. And for those who managed to hold on to one, it became a conversation piece, a car that stood out not just because of its looks, but because of its obscurity. One Can-Am owner puts it best, "People swear I made it up. Then I opened the hood. Game over." That simple act of opening the hood revealed the truth. A 400 V8, the heart of a car that was muscle in its purest form. Despite being one of the last of its kind, the Can-Am's power wasn't immediately obvious, and that was part of its charm. It wasn't loud or flashy like some of its contemporaries, but when you opened the hood, it was clear that this car still had something to offer. In the years since, the Can-Am has become a piece of muscle car history, a reminder of a time when American performance was still in its prime. The 1966 Dodge Coronet W023 was an out-and-out beast, a purpose-built machine that embodied the raw power and no-nonsense attitude of the muscle car era. Created as part of Dodge's effort to capitalize on the burgeoning popularity of factory drag racing, the W023 wasn't designed to be a luxury car or even a comfortable cruiser. It was built to destroy the quarter mile. At its core, the W023 was one of the most intense, bare-bones machines you could buy in 1970. Dodge took their Coronet platform and ripped it down to the absolute essentials, making it a purpose-driven car designed exclusively for performance. This wasn't a car you'd want to take on a Sunday drive with the family. It was a stripped-down, race-ready missile that came equipped with the legendary 426 Hemi V8 engine. With 425 horsepower, though many believe the actual output was much higher, this engine could propel the Coronet from 0 to 60 mph in just over 5 seconds, an unheard-of feat for any production car of its time. The Hemi engine was the star of the show. Known for its incredible performance and durability, the 426 Hemi V8 was the same engine that powered Chrysler's NASCAR entries and dominated drag strips across the country. It was a snarling powerhouse of an engine, delivering enormous torque and power at all speeds. But Dodge didn't stop with just the engine. This car was built to rip down the drag strip with the precision of a machine forged for one thing only: going fast. The W023 was stripped of anything that could slow it down or get in the way of its brutal performance. It had no rear seat, just a gutted interior with thin glass to reduce weight. Even the door panels were made of cardboard to save every precious ounce. The lack of comfort or convenience was intentional. The manual steering, sparse dashboard, and the absence of luxury features were all sacrificed to make the car lighter and quicker. With a factory-installed fiberglass hood, the W023 was barely a car at all, more like a rocket on wheels. Despite its bare-bones nature, the W023 was still street legal, which only added to its mystique. But the reality was that this wasn't a car you'd drive to work or to the grocery store. It was loud, obnoxious, and terrifying. The sheer force of that Hemi engine roaring under the hood was enough to rattle the windows of any house you passed by. It had no power accessories, no power brakes, no power steering, just the raw, unfiltered power of the engine and the sound of the exhaust blasting you into another world of speed. Track rats and die-hard muscle car fans knew that the W023 was a freak of nature, an anomaly that almost defied logic. It was a car that took the concept of a factory muscle car to its extreme. It was designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to be fast, aggressive, and impossible to ignore. And in that, it was a resounding success. But it wasn't all sunshine and drag strips. The W0223 was a handful to drive, a car that demanded constant attention and respect from its driver. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't subtle, it was downright brutal. Driving it wasn't just a test of performance, but of endurance. With no rear seat, no creature comforts, and a suspension designed for maximum speed on the strip, it was a hard-hitting experience that required nerves of steel. The sound of the engine, the thrum of the tires against the pavement, and the almost violent acceleration as the car tore down the track was something that stayed with you long after you turned the engine off. And yet, it wasn't a car that many people could get their hands on. Only 50 units of the W0223 were ever built, making it one of the rarest and most sought-after muscle cars of its era. Dodge didn't advertise the W023, and it wasn't a car you'd find sitting on a dealership lot. You had to know what you were looking for, and even then, it was only available to those serious about drag racing. Most of the owners were racers who wanted a factory-built machine to compete with, and for them, the W023 was the holy grail. For those who had the privilege of driving one, the W0223 left a lasting impression. It wasn't a car you could forget easily. The raw power, the noise, and the absolute lack of refinement made it an unforgettable experience. It was a machine that was pure, unadulterated muscle, a car built with the singular goal of dominating the drag strip. One track rat recalled the experience. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't subtle, it was just fast. The kind of fast that scares you. That's what the W023 was all about. It wasn't for the faint of heart or the casual car enthusiast. It was for those who wanted the edge of extreme performance, those who lived for the thrill of the race and the exhilaration of driving a car that was more machine than automobile. Today, the 1966 Dodge Coronet W023 is a rare, coveted collector's item, a reminder of a time when the muscle car was king and anything was possible.